can join us from our liaison. That's wonderful. I will put the agenda in the chat for everybody's ease of access.
Thank you. Well, welcome to the Vermont Climate Council Rural Resilience Subcommittee meeting for May 14th. And looks like we have a quorum, so we can get started. Does anybody have any changes? Of course, I can't find my agenda on my tabs here.
But it's in the chat.
Right. Does anybody have any proposed changes to the agenda or the minutes that are linked in the agenda? Hearing none, silence means consent. Today, we're primarily going to be talking with the folks that are tasked with assisting and coordinating public outreach and engagement for the Vermont Climate Council. So we're going to spend the bulk of our time talking about that, which is, I think, we're looking forward to and seeing how they can be force multipliers to our work for sure. Before we get into that, let's go into our intros. I think we've introduced everybody, but I just want to be sure if there are any members or staff members who would like to do a little bit more of an in-depth introduction of themselves, we would welcome it.
I don't think we got Dave and Anne. Oh, Anne's raised her hand too.
And I saw Stephanie came on video, so we'll have Dave and Anne and Stephanie.
Hi. Am I supposed to introduce myself?
Dave, we have, you know what? I just remembered that we have been in the last few meetings doing a little bit more in-depth introductions of each of the members and staff members that are on the Rural Resilience Subcommittee. Since we can't really meet in person a lot, it just helps us get to know each other a little bit better. So can you tell us a little bit about your background and why you were interested in being on the subcommittee?
Sure. So I'm Dave Snedeker. I'm the director of the Northeastern Vermont Development Association, NVDA. So we're a joint regional planning commission and regional development corporation. We cover Caledonia, Essex, and Orleans counties and all the 55 plus municipalities. And our region, as everyone probably knows, is probably one of the most rural parts of the state. So it made sense for me to be part of this subcommittee to see what we can do to assist our communities. So.
What's your favorite food, Dave?
Pizza.
Good man. Thank you.
Sure.
Anne, how'd you like to go next?
Sure, great, thanks. Anne Margolis. I'm the Deputy Planning Director at the Department of Public Service. And for those folks who haven't worked much with us, we're the ratepayer advocate for the state. So we participate in a lot of the proceedings around energy siting before the Public Utility Commission and also rate cases and that sort of thing. But we also are responsible for putting out state energy policy primarily through the Comprehensive Energy Plan. And we are working on our next Comprehensive Energy Plan right now. We have to issue it in January. So it's very synchronous in some ways with the work of the Climate Council. And we hope there will be a lot of iteration between the two drafts. And that's a big reason why I'm interested in working on this subcommittee in particular. Our Comprehensive Energy Plan covers not just electricity, but also thermal and transportation. So the 2016 plan had a goal of 90% renewable energy by 2050. And that really is across all those sectors, not just electricity. And I've been working with Dave and Catherine and some others here on the Act 174 regional and municipal enhanced energy planning. So that's sort of a multi-level planning process for energy planning in those plans as well. And I seem to also work on all the energy storage matters that the department encounters, and that's really a rapidly growing area. And I think another reason folks thought I might be a good fit for this subcommittee. And Let's see, I live in Corinth, which is not quite Northeast Kingdom, but we sort of near-ish to there. Pretty rural area. I just 2 days in a row have chased a bear out of my yard. So, feels pretty rural right now. Big bear too. And let's see, I just have a small family. I have a daughter who's 6 years old, but she feels like about 10 children. So yeah, I'm here. It's great to be with y'all.
Thank you very much. And Stephanie.
Hi, everyone. Stephanie Smith, I'm the State Hazard Mitigation Officer at Vermont Emergency Management. So on Erica's team and Ben's team, I manage the 3 FEMA hazard mitigation grant programs, which we use to do a lot of really good resiliency work across the state, mostly related to flooding, a little bit of energy work as well, and reducing our future risk in the state. I manage the state hazard mitigation plan. So right now we're implementing the 2018 plan, and we're starting to think about the 2023 plan. So we update it every 5 years. And a lot of this work will feed directly into that next plan update, which is great. I have one other person on my team, a planner who reviews local hazard mitigation plans and helps me with the state plan and the grant program. Let's see, my background is in planning. I sit on my local planning commission. I like Ann Lawless, she mentioned this on her first intro. I'm also a master gardener, although I'm definitely still learning, lots to learn, but I really enjoy it. And I sit on the board of directors of the Vermont Cancer Support Network, which is very unrelated to this topic, but something I care deeply about. And I have a 2-year-old who takes all of my remaining energy and time. So that's me.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. See, I learned something new, that you're sitting on the board of the Cancer Support Network. That's awesome. So thanks, everybody. I love those intros. So next we can go into our subcommittee liaison and member updates. One update I will start off with is we got word last night, that Leslie Ann Dupigny-Giroux has stepped down as the Science and Data Subcommittee lead or co-lead, but she'll still remain on the council. So definitely miss her though in that leadership position for sure, because she's fantastic. But I know that we'll probably have somebody step right into that role. Right, Jane? I think that's the big nugget of information that I have that comes to top of mind. Catherine, do you have any updates?
Just that we did, Jane and Erica, you and I did speak with the House Rural Caucus yesterday. Was that only yesterday?
It was only yesterday.
Yeah, yesterday, and gave them an update of where we are. And the members there seem very keen on staying involved and informed. And so we suggested a couple of ways that we can stay connected, primarily through the subcommittee co-chair meetings and the updates around that, as well as doing specific outreach with them when we get to the rural best practices portion of our work.
Thank you.
And
Thanks,
that's all
Catherine.
I have.
I was going to share that too, which is why I came off mute. And I don't know if one of you want to just share an update, or I'm happy to from the steering committee meeting this week.
Yeah, that was just this week, wasn't it? My goodness, this week is so
another Monday.
Yes, so the steering committee has started inviting the co-chairs of the subcommittees to a monthly meeting, so that just as an effort to be able to share updates on what the subcommittee is doing and vice versa, so that if there's anything that we need to bring back to the subcommittee. And I can't think of anything that was significant for this first meeting that we were a part of that needed to be brought back to this subcommittee. And it sounds like though the other subcommittees are kind of in alignment with where we're at in terms of scoping and starting the initial work that we're charged with. So I'm trying to remember if there was anything else that I needed to bring back, but I don't think there was. Jane, did I miss anything?
Well, you did a great job of the co-chair updates, but I might just suggest that at the end of the meeting, we viewed and discussed the December 1st deliverable. And I do think that we're sort of coalescing around what will be ready and what won't be ready by December 1st, which is when we're statutorily required to adopt the comprehensive climate action plan. And so the milestones that we've talked about in the past here have shifted a bit, and they all relate to the conversation you're about to have about public engagement and what we'll know when and how we put that forward to the public. But after today's conversation with the consultants, it'll be great next week, perhaps, and I suggested this to Erica and Catherine, that we visit a sort of timetable for the next sort of 5 or so weeks, because what will be required of the subcommittees is to put together a full package of your first package of strategies to go out for public engagement over the summer, which means having them ready at the beginning of July. So it's really not that much time to put together that package. So just planning that out and thinking about what that means for timelines and deliverables will be helpful. So, and I think that'll all be informed by understanding the touch points with the public engagement process. So today's conversation is really apropos. So.
Okay, should we go over to Jay as our science and data liaison?
Everyone, can you hear me okay?
Can.
Yeah, so I think the most substantive thing to share would be our work plan with this group. I think probably a future agenda item, just to get some feedback on that, to see where there are opportunities and overlap. It's kind of meaty too. So it's one of those things that would be good to have some other eyes on it, ahead of the meeting. A lot of our focus is on greenhouse gas inventory and best practices there, and what to approach there. But the climate resilience component is where our two committees overlap, and we want to, as a committee, make sure we're serving all the needs here on however we define what resilience is. Jane, I wasn't able to make the last part of that meeting. There was that categorized anything else that I might have missed?
No, that was great. You guys, they really took a deep dive into the greenhouse gas inventory, which is the core component of their work plan and informs all the other work of how we're doing the data analyses and stuff.
Yep.
Thanks, Jay. I know that Chad said he'd be a few minutes late, so maybe we can circle back to him and see if there's any significant cross-sector mitigation updates when he gets on. Any other updates from members that are pertinent to this group? Okay, why don't we shift over? Jane, would you like to introduce our guests today?
Thanks. So we're really excited that Sarika and Kara are here, as well as Meredith. Meredith and Kara are with Climate Access, and Sarika is with Rise Consulting out of Montpelier. And so they're here to walk us through their role in helping us manage both the communications component of the work as well as the public engagement component of the work over the next year, really, of both developing and informing the climate action plan and then ultimately rolling it out, and how we engage Vermonters around that work. So they're here. It's great to have them, and they'll speak to the core proposal that they have to do that work with us, as well as hopefully have a robust conversation with all of you around the stakeholders and touch points for your work specifically. So thanks so much for making the time. This is their fourth one this week. So I'm sure that they're like perfectionists at this now. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Jane. That's like a perfect summary. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarika Tandon. I'm the principal and founder of Rise Consulting. I'm based here in Vermont, and my work centers around the intersection of race, equity, and environmental issues. I'm so excited to be partnering with Climate Access, both Kara and Meredith. They specialize in building support for climate solutions through innovative engagement projects and strategic consulting. And I just wanted to walk you through a little bit of our approach of how we're thinking about doing the public engagement. And then after that, Kara will talk a bit about activities and timeline. And then we'd love to hear from you about who you think it's important for us to engage with so that this process is as robust as possible. So a key element of our approach is co-creation, which really means taking a collaborative approach to the innovation, design, and implementation around the action plan. And so we're seeing that as co-creation with the Climate Council and with each of the subcommittees. And we're hoping to meet with you at 3 touch points throughout the process to make sure that we're in alignment and that we're hearing from you and that we're all on the same page. And of course, another aspect is co-creating the plan with the Vermont public. So when we think about Vermont communities, we want to create a process that invites community members in and supports their ability to contribute to assessing risks and opportunities and determining strategies to prioritize. And we're hoping that by doing that, we're building buy-in by creating a plan that reflects the priorities of not just the experts on the council and the committees, but of the communities who will ultimately be part of implementing the plan. So really involving them in the process as much as we can. We're also centering practices of equitable engagement, which means showing up with respect, accessibility, and reciprocity, really focusing on communities that face disproportionate climate impacts by working to include community expertise from BIPOC, low-income, youth, LGBTQ plus communities, people with disabilities, and other communities that can be underrepresented in these kinds of planning processes. And one small practice there is just offering underrepresented community members stipends for their time and participation, and being responsive to community and giving them adequate lead times for participation. We're also offering multiple pathways for engagement, which will include storytelling, visual communications, community events, and deliberative dialogues. And depending on the public health guidance, that could be virtual or in person or both, and stakeholder surveys and interviews. And what we're trying to do is offer multiple ways for people to engage and contribute to prioritization and decision-making. And this is challenging, I know, because of the timelines, but really trying to go at the right pace that allows the time for the outreach and input to avoid a process that involves the usual suspects, which is usually what we all do when we're in a rush. Avoiding harm to relationships with communities that have been historically underrepresented and are critical to engage, both for this process and for implementation. Giving people time to give their input on the draft and inform the draft, and avoiding that sort of checkbox community engagement where we make it look like we're asking the community, but we're not really listening. So Kara is going to walk us through the timeline and different elements of the work plan.
Great, thanks so much, Sarika, and thanks to all of you for having us join your meeting today. I'll just walk through the timeline and activities at a pretty high level. Then we'll pause for any questions, and then we want to turn to you and ask you a number of questions around the stakeholders as mentioned. So this first phase, we are focused on developing the public engagement plan, and that also involves a co-creation process. So we are meeting with all of the subcommittees, we're meeting with Jane and the team, an agency of natural resources, and then, so that's a key part. And to get your input on who should we be really considering in this process and making sure we're connecting to. We also have a piece around interviewing a set of stakeholders that reflect the range that we're aiming to reach, as well as hosting 2 online roundtables, one specifically for BIPOC leaders and another that will be more open. And what we're really looking to do is identify people from the stakeholder groups that we are aiming to reach or who are connected to and work with those stakeholders, and ask them, what do you think would be the best way to frame the conversation, as well as the engagement channels that would work most appropriately for the stakeholder group that you're connected to. So I'll come back a little bit with more detail on the process for this before we jump into the questions. From this input, as well as looking at public opinion trends, media trends, social media trends in Vermont, we will develop an engagement strategy. We'll run the draft by the subcommittees, so you do have an opportunity to comment on that. Then we move into, before there is, that initial plan by December 1 going out for input, we want to get the public engaged in the conversation now. So once we have the plan, we'll develop, do a launch for the whole public engagement campaign saying this is taking place. We invite you to be part of the process. There'll be a social media campaign that's done in conjunction to that engagement plan. We'll be developing a set of collateral materials for use in outreach, as well as website content. There'll be an online survey, and then stakeholder dialogues. And as mentioned, this will be a mix of online, and if we're able to, depending on public health guidelines, in person as well. And what's really key there is that, with some stakeholders, and I think in particular, some rural stakeholders, it's very important that we go to where people are at and try and, join their events, join their conversations, versus trying to get them to come into a separate process. One thing I want to note is that what we start at the early point, as I mentioned, doing that outreach to different sector community leaders to get their input at the beginning. And we want to stay in touch with them and return to them at different points to say, we've launched this phase of the campaign. Would you be willing to share this out? Here's a sample email content. Here's some social media content. Here's the link to the survey, etc. We may go back to some of those folks to say, would you be willing to co-host a dialogue with us, with your stakeholder group? So really looking to ideally continue that collaboration model. Once there is that initial plan, then we'll also basically do a bit of a repeat on that some of the same activities, getting out there for comment, announcing it through an event, reaching out through partners to share it and amplify it for comment. And then we'll also add a piece there around creating an online deliberation and voting platform where people can really walk through the risks, what's at stake, the emission sources, and then what are the different strategies that the climate action plan is outlining, and have people really weigh in on their ideas, their concerns, and their thoughts on priorities. Then we get to the final piece of the project, where we are sharing out the final plan. We are holding a press event. And then again, for those organizations and leaders interested, is supporting them to amplify out the final plan through their networks. And then at the very end of the process, we will do a roll-up looking at how we did with the public engagement process, what worked, what didn't, etc. So before we jump into the questions that we would like to ask you, I'll just pause now and see if anybody has any questions for us or comments about the overall strategy. Okay, I don't see any hands raised, so we'll go ahead. So let me just first explain the process that we're using to really map out the stakeholders that we need to reach. So as mentioned, we've been meeting with all of the different subcommittee groups and having a conversation around who are the stakeholders that you need to involve in your subcommittee level work, who are the stakeholders that you feel should be involved in the plan overall. And we're going to capture that in a spreadsheet and really look across the subcommittees to see, you know, where are people looking to connect with the same stakeholders so we can coordinate that. You know, with expert outreach, we're really seeing that as the work of the subcommittee, but just making sure that if other subcommittees are also reaching out to similar expert audience, that's integrated, but then really looking at, you know, the public piece and making sure that's coordinated, because we want to make sure we're coming out with a unified voice where things are cohesive and people understand the whole versus one ask on this piece, another, and confusing folks in that regard. So we'll share the spreadsheet that shows the distinctions for subcommittees and outreach, the commonalities, the more the public level. And we're going to, from that, identify a list, as I mentioned, of folks that we want to interview and invite to those 2 roundtables. So we'll include that and we'll share that with all of the subcommittees so you can comment on that. And then we'll go ahead with that audience mapping and research work. So that's the overall process. Erica, did you have a?
As for the roundtables, are those, is that 2 roundtables like per subcommittee, or is that 2 roundtables for the council as a whole?
It's 2 roundtables for the process as a whole that would involve organizational and sector leaders representing the stakeholder groups that we're trying to reach.
Before we launch into the questions that you folks have for us, I just wanted to float, now that you've laid out this really impressive plan for public outreach, I wanted to float an idea that Catherine and Pat Field with CBI and I discussed yesterday, as we've been kind of wrestling with making sure that we are approaching our work with a focus on equity issues and equity related challenges that inhibit communities in Vermont becoming more resilient to climate change. And trying to craft a discussion around that and come to consensus about what the big bucket issues are in Vermont through that lens, so that as we are moving through our inventory process, our analysis on the programs that exist and or our needed policy recommendations that are going into the climate action plan, we have done so having really analyzed where the equity issues are, and we have integrated that into those recommendations. So in an effort to kind of get that process started, and recognizing that we really on this subcommittee don't have membership that represent voices of like the BIPOC community specifically, or organizations that represent those communities, disability community, other, marginalized, traditionally marginalized populations that we know are inordinately affected by disasters that are exacerbated by climate change. So it's really important to get those voices to the table, and we also wanted to be sensitive that we're not just reaching out to those groups of folks because, just as Sarika was mentioning, just because it's like part of the process, that these are folks that are impacted, like I said, more and more, and they are in a cycle of impact that, especially if they're located in a vulnerable location, that they can't necessarily get out of. And so we want to make sure that those voices are at the table, that and are integrated into our recommendations from the forefront. So we were talking about the fact that there are equity-related barriers to resilience in Vermont, and there's a lot of data out there, a lot of information out there, but we thought it would be useful and relevant to put together a workshop with folks and representatives from various stakeholder groups that could have this discussion, frame this discussion, and really ID the big bucket barriers to resilience in Vermont specifically. And then from there, we could work as a subcommittee through a similar engagement process to frame how that translates into the charge of the subcommittee. I'm just going to stop there because we had a great discussion with Pat Field yesterday on, from a facilitation standpoint. He suggested we bring this to you folks because it's really public engagement. And I just want to stop there and get your thoughts, and actually first go to Catherine and make sure I didn't miss anything based on our conversation.
I don't think you missed anything. It's going to be interesting to hear from our consultants about how that fits into the overall plan now that we've seen it, because we didn't have that context when we had our conversation.
Yeah, and just to clarify, the roundtables that I mentioned that are just 2 are to shape the public engagement strategy, but we do have stakeholder dialogues in mind as part of the engagement plan. And so absolutely, that is part of what we would want to be working with you on, is to figure out how do we best have that conversation, who needs to be at the table. Are there different organizations we might co-host that with, et cetera? How do we shape that conversation so we really get to the heart of, both the barriers, but also the ideas people have for resilience? Because, what we've found is that you end up with really interesting ideas that you don't think of yourselves when you open that up. And so, to go back to that, we want to have that conversation before the initial plan is released in December, so that input is actually shaping it. And so in those stakeholder dialogues, and this speaks to the work that Jane was mentioning, we're not looking to go in with everything fully baked. What we're looking to go in is like, here are the ways in which Vermont is at risk and people in different, things are at risk. What do you think about that? What do you think the biggest concerns are with that? What are the biggest challenges with that? But then we don't want to leave people there, because that's really depressing, right? Actually. And also it leaves the next piece off, which is that we want to say, okay, so here's the range of strategies that we're looking at for the plan. We're not saying these are in the plan, but here's kind of the range that we're looking at. What do you think about this? What's missing? Are there other ideas? What would you prioritize? And again, it's not at a detailed level. It can be things like, well, it's going to be really important for Vermont to prioritize energy efficiency and moving to clean energy in buildings, because that's a big emissions category, or in the transportation sector, moving to electrification, et cetera. So, or, planting more trees, or some of the pieces that would come up with carbon sequestration in the rural setting as well. So putting those out at a high level and inviting people to the table, like, what are your thoughts on this? And then, as Sarika mentioned, we've got 3 touch points with the subcommittees. So once we have that initial conversation and have done that initial, survey, et cetera, we'll roll that up and come back and share that back with you, so it can inform the development of that initial plan going out for December 1. And then once we've had input on that, because we've got that next round of public engagement, then we'll roll that up and come back to you and say, and here's what we heard when we actually put the plan out itself, you know, for comment. And that can then be woven into any other revisions made before it's finalized by March. So yeah, so I think that's perfect, Erica, in terms of really, you know, and that's what we want to move to in the conversation now, is really, who do we need to reach, why, you know, and how might we go about doing that, either with your connections, reaching out to organizations, again, that are connected to the various stakeholders that we want to engage.
I'd like to add something, Kara, if I may, which is that part of the conception of the BIPOC roundtable specifically was to meet a lot of the objectives that you just laid out around equitable engagement and relationship building. So the questions will not just be about communication strategy, but about priorities, needs, and concerns about vulnerabilities and impacts. So I do think that roundtable could meet some of the needs that you're expressing there. It will be an affinity space, so we won't have people from the subcommittees necessarily witnessing unless they're BIPOC people or co-facilitating, but the data that we gather from there is for that specific purpose to give you a summary that helps really raise some of those equity issues to the top. And then the second roundtable, I've heard it talked about in two ways. One is leaders that we need to talk to more generally, but also other groups that are underrepresented and differentially vulnerable. So again, we have equity issues around age, ability status, other identity sort of categories. And so I'm hoping that we will have a lot of those folks at that table, and that the report that comes out of that will give you a lot of the data that you're looking for.
So I think what I'm hearing, and well, you know what, maybe I'll shut up for a second, and maybe my answers will come in the rest of the conversation. So thank you very much.
Great. Okay, so what we first want to do is ask you all to share with us your views on the stakeholders that need to be involved in your subcommittee work, and what you hope or need to gain from that engagement. And so maybe Catherine, I'll turn it to you to answer that first. And then when you're done, if you want to popcorn it to the next person, and we'll just move around that way.
That sounds good. On my list, top would be municipal officials, including select board members, planning commissions, conservation commissions, energy committees, all those, the appointed and elected local officials. And I'll pass it over to Mike.
Thanks, Catherine. You know, I've experienced doing some of this already. And what we had, all the municipal leaders and people like that at the meetings, even some of the planning commissions and the help they can bring. The others I think that might be good to get involved are any, you know, agency and natural resources, Act 250 commissions, especially if it's anything to do with the built world. I think it's important to have them up front there to see what we're thinking about. And then after them, to add one more, is you get all the leaders of the towns and the municipals and everything like that. And in the end, a lot of it comes down to the individual landowner. And I think as a part of this, we should figure out how to get that outreach down to the individual landowner, whether they're helping to make the town more resilient or they're helping to make their own property more resilient. But you can get the select board and the town manager on board, but that really doesn't get you what you need to make things happen. So those are my thoughts. Thanks.
Mike, do you want to pass it to someone else now?
Sure. How about Joe? I see him in my down left-hand corner there.
Hi, everybody. To add to Catherine's list, I would, of municipal officials, I would add road foremen. And, you know, sometimes some towns have road commissioners, but they're very much, you know, boots on the ground, and they're dealing with the direct impacts of, you know, flooding for sure, but some of the other threats that we're thinking about, just like, I don't know, maybe invasives they're dealing with, or just even the incremental changes of heat and how that affects their infrastructure and things like that. So I think they might be a good group of people to hear from. And for the consultants who don't know, I'm with the Agency of Transportation, but just sort of thinking beyond my transportation role. I also been thinking, you know, about housing, and we definitely, you know, we have a couple RPC reps on board, and you know, they bump up against housing and are part of that, and ACCD for sure. But I was thinking on the, you know, like we talked about Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, and Jen Holler is helping to kind of pull some stuff together on the inventory. But I think having somebody that it's their full-time job and really engaged in providing housing around the state could be really important to have them their voice represented in some fashion. And I think, you know, I see that as, you know, that's both infrastructure and people when you start talking about housing. Oh, now I have to pick somebody. I'll go to Chad.
All right. Great. Thanks, Joe. And sorry for being late, everybody. Yeah, I mean, a lot of my ideas are taken. RPCs for sure. Departments of Public Works, as Joe mentioned. And then emergency responders. Seems like emergency responders kind of, you know, Erica could probably provide a more intelligent response here, but you know, it seems like whether it's a flood or whether it's any kind of disaster, right? The first responder community is there, and they're generally pretty well plugged into their own communities. So I would offer emergency response. I would also offer utilities, but you know, I know we've got Mike here. But the utilities are, you know, they face a lot of customers in a lot of different locations of the state. So, and let's see, I guess I'll pass it over to Erica now.
Sure. One group of folks that came up in our conversation yesterday was folks that live in especially mobile home parks. A lot of mobile home parks are located along rivers and experience repetitive loss as it relates to flooding. So we've talked about engaging with Kelly Hamshaw from the University of Vermont, who we are working with currently, as well as if there are any association representatives that could speak to them. The other one that I thought of with trades was trade associations, especially as it relates to green building practices and or the requirements necessary or not necessary for green building practices. That's, you know, there's two sides to that coin for sure. And so I think we will want to hear from both viewpoints. And then probably some CAP agency representation or organizational representation for folks that are, you know, any organization that is providing support to folks in an economic fashion or working to lift people up out of poverty. And then I'll pass it over to Ann Lawless.
Thanks, Erica. The talk about the locally elected officials made me want to add town health officers, because they often interact with people who have serious needs. And then I'm glad you talked about you touched on the caps. I think a lot of the statewide housing organizations that have home repair programs, they know what can get done. They have a good sense of the needs. There are also some towns that have landlord organizations. I'm thinking about St. Johnsbury. They support landlords in, they have a little grant program to help landlords make accessibility improvements to their rental units. And I guess in relation to, I love the plan that I love the outreach plan. Just if I could just quickly say, is there funding? I mean, a lot of the people that we want to reach, I mean, I can think of 2 people in my town. They don't have phones and they don't, I mean, a computer, forget it. So you basically have to communicate with them in writing by sending them a letter. And that's time consuming and it could be expensive. That's all. Thank you. And I'll pass it along to, not sure I know who all is on the committee versus a visitor. How about Ann Margolis?
All right, that's a good list folks have come up with. The only maybe filling in a couple blanks, just broadly energy providers. I was thinking, you know, we've got Chad here, you know, maybe representing solar development community and Mike representing utilities, but there's also sort of a broader range of folks who deliver fuels, for instance, to homes where the transition that might come out of this, you know, might pose an existential threat to folks whose livelihood that is. So maybe there's strategies around helping those folks move toward other types of work in this realm. And also, you know, the weatherization contractors, you know, even folks who are installing generators. I mean, if we're talking about resilience at the home, energy resilience specifically, you know, for a lot of people, that's a few $100 generator powered by diesel or propane, as opposed to a battery, even with a program like GMP offers. So just getting all of the energy providers in there. Let's see. Did Dave have a chance, or?
I guess I do now. Well, I think everybody's hit the groups I've thought of, but I'm thinking of my own particular village of Barton, which is a low-income community in the Northeast Kingdom. And we, like Erica said, we have a mobile home park right by the river. We have a lot of old, inefficient housing stock, and a lot of people with not a lot of means are living in these inefficient dwellings, and also a lot of times in marginal areas where they're at risk. So making sure we get to those lower income populations is super important. And I guess I'll pick on Lindsay. Maybe she stepped away.
Lindsay, you're on mute if you're there. Okay, I think Stephanie, we haven't heard from you yet.
Yeah, and I don't think I have anything original to add. I would definitely second a lot of things that were already said, but
okay, and
nothing new.
Okay, Ben.
Well, hello. Very good list generated. I guess the place to reach everybody is the hardware store.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, is that everyone? Did everyone have a chance? Looks like
this is Jens. If I may, I'll just jump in. I think the timing of the outreach is very important. You know, most Vermonters don't understand the way all the different issues are interconnected with climate change. And so by crowdsourcing potential solutions, the type of solutions we're likely to get from that list are likely to be smaller to relate to single issues. And it's our job as a working group to find efficiencies and to make the case for efficiencies. And so I think the matrix of all of the different feedback we've gotten and why we chose the solutions we chose is going to be the most important piece of outreach, because that's where we say, hey, we heard you. We hear that you offer this potential solution. Here's why that's not on our top 10 list. So I think the timing of the outreach is really important, and the substance of it, because the odds that we use a lot of the smaller ideas that come out of crowdsourcing are probably pretty slim. It's our job to find those efficiencies and explain why those are the most efficient solutions. So I just wanted to add that. I don't have any other specific stakeholders to add to the list. Thank you.
Kara, I see you've addressed it in the chat, but I just wanted to let you know that we tend to keep a pretty informal committee and bring in all of our members who take the time to be here, whether they're members of the committee or members of the public. So I'm glad you'll be opening this up for additional comment.
Great. And we just have a couple more things. If we have time, I'm going to turn it over to Sarika now.
Yeah, thanks, Kara. So there is some redundancy in these questions, and we're comfortable with that. So we're asking for new or novel responses if this phrasing sort of elicits a different level. So when it comes to sectors, groups, or communities that need to be engaged in the climate action plan development process and implementation, is anyone else coming up for you? And then if I may just add the fourth question as well, so we can think about everything at the same time. When it comes to public stakeholders, are there specific community, business, youth, equity, Indigenous, local government, other leaders who represent and or are already involved with outreach efforts to key constituents that we need to reach? And we want to really invite people to share names. You can share them in the chat. You can come off mute and say them out loud. We'll also be sharing a spreadsheet where you can see everyone's ideas and populate that after we are off this call. And thank you, Meredith, put those questions in the chat if it's easier to look at the words if you're a visual person.
If I could, Sarika, thanks. I think you hit the nail on the head when you went to youth. I feel it's really, really important that we engage our youth in this outreach. You know, they're going to be most impacted over their lifetimes by the climate crisis. So 100% youth.
If anyone has youth organizations or leaders that you recommend, we're really open to that.
I was wondering about sort of the business community, and that's probably too broad. But I was thinking in terms of maybe the outdoor recreation business community, because they, particularly the ski industry, but there might be others as well that are going to be impacted by less snowfall, and and I think they're already adapting, because it's just unfolding at a speed which they're just naturally responding to. But it would be kind of good to get their perspective on it and what they're thinking and what their business plans might be, and and sort of how what sort of help, if any, do they need. And I maybe others have some other ideas on like groups of businesses that we should be reaching out to. Nothing comes to mind. I mean, ACCD, if Secretary Curley is around, still there, could probably help a little bit with that.
I think I can add something on that, Joe. So if you went to the associations like the Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility, or the Associated Industries of Vermont, or the Vermont Chamber of Commerce, even, those would be good ways to reach multiple businesses fairly quickly, I think.
Thanks, David.
I am here, and that's exactly what I would have said. And yes, of course, we can try to help in any way to reach them.
Thank you. I'm seeing some really great recommendations coming in the chat, so thank you to everyone for that. Any other thoughts coming to mind for people, particularly public stakeholders, that we could sort of leverage their networks to engage key constituencies?
Can you describe, when you say public stakeholders, how does that, how do you classify stakeholders?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm thinking about all the people who are already a part of the process because of their institutional affiliation, such as subcommittee members and council members. So people who may not otherwise have an opportunity to be engaged that we really want to reach out to, which ultimately is everyone, but strategically thinking of who it's most important to connect this work with.
Yeah, and just to add, you know, it's come up in other subcommittee meetings, like there may be technical experts that a subcommittee needs to reach out to, that they've got particular expertise or knowledge that you need to input into your process. And so we're really focused more on the public stakeholder side, but still wanting to capture those expert stakeholders that the subcommittees need to engage so that there's coordination across the subcommittees around that.
Judith, I saw your hand up for a moment there.
I did have my hand up. I'm pleased to hear that one of the groups that you're planning to engage are Vermonters with disabilities. I think that's really a valuable population to bring into this process. And there are a number of policy and advocacy groups that work with the disability community, and I can probably help you connect with some of those.
Thank you so much, Judith.
I know they would really welcome the opportunity to be part of this process.
This is kind of a specific example and one that we have identified before, more from a, you know, we need to leverage their subject matter expertise, but it's and I may need some help with this. Norwich University has the Global Center for Resilience, and I'm going to butcher the title, but Dr. Kulkarni runs it, and you know, they definitely you know, bring subject matter expertise to the table for not just us, but for everybody, for the Climate Council.
Thank you. Ian, I see your hand up.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and jump on the Judith bandwagon with gratitude and appreciation for the openness of this subcommittee to letting folks chime in. I just want to start by first saying that I really appreciate the thoughtfulness and depth of what's been presented so far. I think that there are a lot of people in Vermont who have a lot of things to say about climate that haven't either felt included or felt like their input would matter. So I appreciate everything I'm seeing in terms of being able to actually get to reach those people. One piece that I haven't seen come up as much, but I want to make sure isn't lost, is the folks who have been engaged in and care about the climate conversation generally. So as part of my work, I worked with the Energy and Climate Associate at the Vermont Natural Resources Council, and I also helped to co-coordinate the Vermont Energy and Climate Action Network, or VCAN, made up of town energy committees. That may have came up in conversations you guys have had already, but I know they have been chomping at the bit to talk about these issues and be engaged in them, and have engaged in multiple ways in prior processes. And I know that they were key players and groups to kind of co-host meetings or whatnot regionally when the Vermont Legislative Climate Solutions Caucus held a listening tour when they were developing their plans. And I know those meetings were well attended and well received. So I think that they have both a lot of experience in having and hosting conversations around these issues. And the one other group that I would mention is I also helped to coordinate the Vermont Climate Coalition, which is made up of 30 plus advocacy organizations, youth groups, faith groups, kind of devoted to climate action. And we have been kind of doing this sort of outreach ourselves, and also trying to build out something that could be complementary or additive to the list of folks to reach out to. And we would love the chance to speak with you all further at some point down the line about kind of what we've done thus far and what we know of the landscape, to try to help inform reaching not only the folks that haven't been reached yet, but also some of the folks who have been speaking up again and again and again and again in previous processes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ian. Yeah, it is definitely part of the strategy to leverage networks that are already there and to amplify the message through those networks. So I appreciate your willingness to collaborate there. Any other thoughts folks want to share? Scrolling back to the agenda here, making sure we have time. Good. Kara, do you think we should close now? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you all so much, both for what you've shared in the conversation, but there are so many great ideas in the chat, and Ian will definitely be following up with you as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Great.
Well, thank you all
Thank you for making time to be here. Yeah, go ahead.
Awesome. So I think we've arrived at our public comment portion of the meeting. Is there any members of the public that would like to add some additional comments?
Erica, it's Ben.
Hello, Ben.
Hello, I'm not a member of the public, I don't think. Well, we're all members of the public, so I guess I can take a moment of this segment. As previously threatened, I wanted to say at every meeting that we have an urgent ongoing need for non-federal match to continue doing hazard mitigation programs and taking advantage of that federal funding to improve flood resiliency. And we have a couple of projects that we've invested a lot of work in, and where landowners are very invested in getting themselves out of their current flood-prone situation, which may come undone because we don't yet have a source of non-federal match. So there's a whole motel, I guess, in Ludlow that really needs to go away before it gets flooded again, and we need to find the match. So it's there hanging over us. We don't know whether there'll be any funding through the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board coming out of this budget that can be allocated to bridge that gap. But I want to keep it on everybody's mind that one thing that I think falls squarely in our committee's lane is a state hazard mitigation program. Thank you for the commercial opportunity.
Thanks, Ben. Okay, so Catherine, we'd like to talk about what we have coming up for next week?
Yes. Before we do that, I just wanted to check in with Chad. Since you weren't here for our subcommittee, our liaison updates, if you had anything to add to that conversation.
No, I did attend cross-sector mitigation subcommittee yesterday, and starting to think about actually mapping out some of the strategies around transportation, thermal, and electrical generation.
That's exciting.
Yeah, it's starting to get exciting. I mean, the spreadsheet is largely unpopulated at this point, but and it's a big,
at least there's a spreadsheet. That's good.
Yeah, it's a big spreadsheet, but yeah, no, a lot of good discussion, a lot of good work, and I think it's really starting to ramp. Jane, anything else? I don't have the agenda in front of me to recall everything else that was discussed, but.
Sorry, my husband was asking a question, but so I missed most of it. But I will just say what that one, I'm sure Chad alluded to the idea that we're starting to think about templates in that subcommittee, and that template is something that we'd like to then bring to this subcommittee as well as Ag and Ecosystems, because those are the three subcommittees who are really going to be putting forward strategies and recommendations, and so that's to be coming very, very soon. And that way we can all be feeding into similar documents to help make the development of the climate action plan writing easier. And then I plan to talk on Monday with Climate Access and RISE around the idea of also developing a slide deck for or considering with them how they intend to present your strategies and recommendations in the summertime, fall, around testing that with the public, so that you can also be feeding into a coherent presentation that we can use with the public around testing your strategies and recommendations. So we started to do that in cross-sector, and that's forthcoming in your subcommittee as well. So thanks.
Great, thanks. So next week, we have teed up the more in-depth conversation about the vulnerability index assessment and municipal tools that are part of our scope of work. We have confirmed someone can attend from Maine, and we will be getting an overview of the GMP tool. And then is there anybody else we've confirmed?
I think we have Leslie Ann coming over from Science and Data.
Is Leslie Ann able to attend?
I wanted to double check with that. I think that's what I saw in the email.
I invited her, recognizing that it'd be nice to also start to discuss the climate assessment in this and how it pertains to this work. However, I'm unsure of what Leslie Ann's capacity is at this moment, recognizing that she didn't only step down from the as co-chair, she stepped down from Science and Data. And so she's going to be there as a resource for subcommittees to draw on with her specific expertise. So this makes sense. But I just want to confirm with her, and I hope that'll work. And perhaps someone from the Gund Institute would be more appropriate for that anyway. But I just thought with her role, it made sense to coordinate with her.
All right, great.
And Jens just put a comment in the chat, and I just want to, if it's not for next week, but Vermont Conservation Design, I started to talk about this with Ag and Ecosystems today also. I think it's really ripe for a presentation on Vermont Conservation Design as a grounding framework around ecological resiliency, and it feels like an overlap between this committee and Ag and Ecosystems. So I was going to tee up the opportunity to have a presentation for both subcommittees and talk with the co-chairs about when that would best be served, sooner rather than later. And it just went from being really sunny to raining on my computer. So
oh, nice.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.
Just as a clarification too, I was thinking probably 10 minutes or less in terms of the presentation. Does that sound about what you were thinking? Yeah.
Yeah, as long as you think it would take to give us a flavor.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think you'll want to prepare for more time with the main gentleman, but I'll be able to. So he is now the resiliency policy director for Maine, and in charge with implementing the resiliency work from the climate action plan. But he was also the chair of the resiliency and adaptation work group for the Maine climate action plan. So I'm going to ask him to speak specifically to vulnerability indices, but it'd be great if he could give sort of a broad brush overview of Maine's approach to this component of their work.
Great. And so we're hoping that discussion will really inform our next steps on completing that part of our scope of work, and will give us the direction that we need to bring on a consultant to help us further utilize and refine the existing tools that we have to put them to good use in the application of our climate action plan. Also, I should note that Erica and I are meeting next week with Jay, the facilitator, to really, and hopefully Jane too, to map out our coming couple of months in terms of teeing up agendas and goals that we have for each meeting and related to our tasks. So we'll be able to share that with everybody to really make sure we're all on the same page to map out what we need to do to get to a good place by July, it looks like.
Yeah, and that way we really feel that many of these conversations are brought to this forum to inform and enhance the work that we're doing outside of these meetings, and will help in when the deliverables will be, you know, more enhanced deliverables because of some of the subject matter expertise that we bring to the meetings. But we also recognize that some of the meetings and at strategic touch points will need to be focused on committee discussion and, you know, going through and pouring through some of the drafted recommendations. We want to be sure that we're planning them appropriately, so we don't get behind and we give enough space for thought. Any feedback from members or parting comments? We're a little early, but that's not a bad thing for an opinion.
My only parting comment would be, yeah, TGIF.
Finally.
Yes. And in case you didn't see it in the chat, Jay offered to give some overview of scenarios on the high level if Leslie Ann is unable to attend. So thank you, Jay.
To follow up on Chad's TGIF, Jay, non-severe thunderstorms, right?
I was just when Jane said she was getting rained on, I was like, what's the radar looking like?
Yeah, these are pretty passive and mostly just aesthetic thunderstorms, Mike. So I think we're good.
I don't think I've heard that term before, aesthetic thunderstorms.
Nice to look at.
Have a great
well,
weekend, everybody.
Thank you. We'll see everybody.
Bye. Bye.